So I want to talk about retrospectives antipatterns, because not everybody likes retrospectives. I've actually called it team meetings that don't suck, just to lure some more people into this room, and it seems to have been working. So I'm originally, as you can see, PhD in computer science, came from working with design patterns and language constructs in object-oriented languages, and now I am facilitating retrospectives. Quite a journey, and I think it's fun, and it's been fun for a number of years for me. And the reason why I want to give this talk is because I want you to look like this when you hear that you have a retrospective coming up. I want your developers to look like this when it's retrospective time. They're not trying to run away. They're actually dancing. So that's the takeaway I hope that you'll take with you. And I'd just like to know, to figure out who I'm talking to, how many of you facilitate retrospectives yourself? How many of you attend retrospectives? How many of you don't know what a retrospective is and is just here because the seats are nice? Right, a very brave person in the back. So I'll give about 10 minutes of introductions to retrospectives just for you. I hope you appreciate it. And everybody else, I hope you'll bear with me. So super short introduction to antipatterns and retrospectives just to set the ground. So patterns, it's a literary form of abstractly describing a solution to an often recurring problem. In essence, it's experience written down so that other people can learn from your experiences, which is not really possible, but at least we're trying. And what we get is a pattern name which gives us a language to talk about things like visitor, observer, mediator. We don't have to explain all the things that goes into the pattern. We can just use the pattern name. So patterns, I'm sure you've heard of. And I'm going to talk about antipatterns. And some people say, why are you talking about antipatterns? Because that's not very good. That's like an anti-pattern. But what I mean when I say antipatterns is that you have some sort of problem. You do something that you think is a good solution based on what you know at the time, the skills you have, your experience, how tired you are that day, you do that. It's an often recurring bad solution to a problem. That means that it has more negative consequences than benefits. And then you have the refactored solution, which helps you out of that problem. And the interesting thing is that over time or in a different context, things that are patterns can become anti-patterns. So you might have been doing something for a long time, which was the absolute brilliant way of doing it. But then when the context changes or the technology changes, then it's not a good idea anymore. An example is microservices. So microservices is an architectural pattern that became very popular. So people started using it. And in many circumstances, it's a very good pattern. It's a very good way of creating your architecture. Unfortunately, in some organization, what happens is that it becomes an anti-pattern solution. So that you end up with something which is really cluttered with a lot of microservices. And the thing that you wanted to achieve, you don't achieve that. So suddenly that pattern solution has become an anti-pattern solution. So what you need to do is that you need to refactor it, and in this case we're trying to refactor it by going back to having a monolith, which in some cases, in some contexts, is the only way of doing it. So that's what I mean when I say anti-patterns. And what do I mean then when I say retrospectives? Oh, I forgot this one. I just put this in this morning, sorry. So you all know the Gartner hype cycle. If we look at patterns and anti-patterns and refactored solutions, you can say that the pattern solution is when it's on the hype, the highest hype, as it was, for instance, with microservices. And then at some points it becomes an anti-pattern solution, everybody hates it, and then in the plateau of productivity it becomes a refactored solution, and that's what we're going for now. That's the right way of dealing with it. Like patterns in general, it used to be something everybody should do, and then everybody hated it, and now we find a good way. It's probably the same with Agile. So retrospectives is a recurring meeting, as most of you know, that you have in a team where you are sharing what you have experienced, and you're also appreciating what happened to other people. So you're saying, okay, I can see that that wasn't so good for you. I really like that, but it wasn't so good for you. Or I appreciate that you did that. I want to compliment you for that. And it's very important to have a place to do that, especially in Denmark, where people are not so in general good at giving compliments, at least not where I come from in Jutland. I think you're better in Copenhagen, but mostly talking to people in Jutland. But it's great. And also, most important, that you learn. So in essence, I think that retrospectives is the core of Agile, because for me, Agile is inspect and adapt. It's being flexible enough to change your route if you can see that you're not on the right route. So this learning cycle that you have with retrospectives is what makes you Agile, is what enables you to change the process, change the way you have the tests, change the way that you communicate with other teams, change all sorts of things. And then, as my late father said, to understand everything is to forgive everything. And I think that's one of the most important factors of the retrospectives, is that it's almost like team building, where you appreciate, okay, I can see you couldn't have done anything else in this situation. So I forgive that, and let's move on, let's learn from that. So sometimes my clicker's working, sometimes it isn't. I'm going to talk about 6 Retrospectives Antipatterns today, of the 24 I have in the book. And the first one is called Wheel of Fortune. And you should imagine that you're in a Tivoli and somebody's driving that Wheel of Fortune, and sometimes you win a prize, but sometimes you don't. And it's pure luck, or maybe they've like sort of created a system where you never win, so it could be not just luck, but also bad will. But anyway, it's like imagining that you're turning this Wheel of Fortune, and sometimes you're lucky. And I've given the antipattern that name because it's sometimes the case that people have retrospectives where they say, let's start do more of this, let's stop do this, let's continue, let's do more of, let's do less of. The start, stop, continue activity in retrospectives. And there's nothing wrong with gathering data in that way in a retrospective. The problem is if you're going directly from gathering data here and then deciding what to do. So it could be that you say, we should have more pair programming. So you just, okay, that's easy. The action point is pair programming 3 days a week, 3 hours a day with all these people, and we'll do that. But that's only a good solution to the problem, if the problem is actually that they're forgetting to do pair programming. If the not doing pair programming is just a symptom of a different problem, that is, for instance, that they don't trust each other, or they're afraid of each other, they don't want to show their code to other people, and they don't believe in pair programming altogether, then that solution is not a good solution. Then you should come up with a solution that changes the actual problem, the cause behind the symptom. And the same goes for less meetings. I can't count how many times the action point of a retrospective is, we should have less meetings. And you probably come across that as well. So if it is because we have too many meetings, then it is a good idea to just remove these meetings. But often, if you dive into that discussion, you'll learn that it's not because you have too many meetings, it's because you have too bad meetings. That they are not efficient, it's the wrong people that are there, you're not concluding anything because you don't have a facilitator that helps you stop the discussion. People are discussing things in different ways at the same meeting. Some people just don't want to hear themselves talk. So just having less meetings, just removing like 3 out of the 5 stand-ups and every other retrospective, and we'll have no sprint planning, is not going to solve it for you, because the remaining meetings will still be bad. They will still be team meetings that suck. And the last thing, stop ignoring the pull requests. You could set up a bot that reminds people about this, but if the problem is not that they forget it, if the problem is that they don't know what to do with it, or they don't feel safe doing anything about it, then it won't change. So that's why I call it a Wheel of Fortune, because sometimes the things that you see in the stop, start, continue are the right things, and definitely the things you need to solve and do. But sometimes it's just a symptom of something else. And then it's like putting lotion on skin cancer. It might look better for a day, but the skin cancer will still be there. So in retrospectives, there are 5 phases, and the first phase is setting the stage, getting ready. The next is gathering data, where you can use a start, stop, continue, or a timeline, or whatever you use. And then you have the generating insights, and that is what people often miss in a retrospective. It's also the thing that's most difficult. So now we gathered all this data, and as the developers we jump to conclusions because we are so hooked up on finding solutions to problems, because that's what we're really good at. So we come up with solutions really quickly. We don't stop and say, okay, so this is the data. Let's generate insights. Let's try to learn from this. Let's try to figure out what actually caused these things. And one way of doing that could just be to ask people to talk about the post-it notes that they put up, and ask about what's the story behind this. Why did we come in this situation? It could be that we have 5 whys, where we have interviews between 2 people where we're saying, So why did the test fail? And somebody's answering, well, we didn't have the right data. Why didn't we have the right data? Well, because we didn't talk to the right people. Why didn't we talk to the right people? Because we didn't know who the right people were. Why didn't we know who the right people were? Well, we never asked anybody. So you see that we're coming from the test is failing to a communication problem, which I think in my experience with retrospectives, it often turns out to be a communication problem. It looks like a technical problem, but actually often is with people. Another way to generate insights is to use a fishbone diagram or Ishikawa diagram. Some of you might have seen this before. So what happens is that you draw a fish skeleton, and then you put the problem at the head. So you say, okay, so we had a missed deadline. Let's look at causes. What caused this missed deadline? And then you ask people to put up post-it notes on the different ribs of the fish. It could be that we had poor prioritization, that we didn't follow up on the prioritization. We didn't have any looking through the backlog every other week or every week to see how we should prioritize to not miss this deadline. It could also be that we have too much tech debt, that we actually can't build the thing fast enough because the code that we're working with is so difficult to work with that it takes longer than it should. It could also be that the people have no motivation because there are no celebrations of the small wins. And if they have no motivation, if they have no energy, nothing will be done, no matter how important it is. That's people again. It could also be that the requirements were set too early and you never looked at the requirements again. You never saw, is it still where we're going for? Or you only heard it in the end and then you had to do a lot and then you missed the deadline. And then of course there'll also be some people who are saying that the desks are too small. So it's not necessarily a good cause for missing a deadline, but it's okay. We should hear everybody say anything at retrospectives, and we do. So this is an activity that takes a bit longer to generate insights, but if it is a problem that continues to recur at the retrospectives, maybe it's time for a fishbone analysis of this problem to hear from everybody what could the causes be. So that next stage is decide what to do, where people normally just brainstorm on action points or experiments, and then we close the retrospective. So if we go through this quickly, when we're setting the stage, we are asking the action points or the experiments that we decided on at the last retrospective. What's the status on that? Did we get them done? And if we got them done, did we get the thing out of it that we wanted to get out of it? Yes or no? And if no, could we do something different? Was it long-term goals? Could we divide it into smaller things? And you also make everybody say something because of the activation phenomenon. If people have said something, it's easier for them to say something again during the meeting. It's definitely true the other way around. If you allow them to be quiet in the beginning, it's much easier for them to stay quiet, especially when it's online. Then they're just muted the whole time. So making sure to set the stage is important. And also if you have a theme for the retrospective, like if you have something recurring that you never really have enough time to talk about in the retrospective, you can say, this is focused on our learning, this is focused on our testing process, this is focused on our communication with another team. When we gather data, we can do that in a million different ways. There are a lot of things online out there, a lot of things that can say, let's do it with superheroes, let's do it with cartoons, let's do it with escape rooms. There's a lot of very good ideas for gathering data, and that's the easy part of it. The generating insights, as I talked about, is difficult. Deciding what to do is also a bit difficult because you brainstorm on a lot of things that you want to do, and then you normally dot vote. But if you dot vote, you know that sometimes the minority after a democratic vote are not very happy. So you need to figure out if you have a team where there's a minority of a specific type of people and they never get anything that they want out of the retrospective because it's always the majority that chooses what should be done, what the action points are. And you need to figure out how do we do that? Do we divide the votes so that we also have to vote on the things that the minority wants? Or do you have a consent round afterwards where you ask everybody, do you consent to what we decided on here? And give them the opportunity to say, I can consent to this if we only have this meeting every other week, or I can consent to this if I don't have to be part of it and it's only you. But just asking people, are you okay with this? I think is a good thing to do after a democratic vote. And then you close the retrospective, you make the summary, you make sure that the action points or the experiments are written down. You make sure that they have a start date and a deadline. You make sure that they have somebody responsible. Sometimes the team is saying, oh, it's a team. The team is going to do it. The team is responsible. We'll do it together. No, it doesn't work. You might have to all do something, But we need somebody responsible to remind you, because tomorrow you'll be looking at your backlog again, and there'll be things from the stakeholders that seem more important. But if you want to continue to improve as a team, you should actually do these things that you decided to do, because otherwise the retrospective is a waste of time. So that is a retrospective life cycle. And a meeting life cycle in general is like this. It starts off with a topic, and then you broaden it out, and you say, okay, so I have this experience, I have this data, and you're sort of setting the stage, and you're broadening it out, you're gathering data. Then you have this groan zone where people are discussing, and they're saying, oh, it could be because of this, or maybe we should do this, or maybe we should do this. And then as a facilitator, you need to be the one who's opening it up to the divergence, keeping it in the groan zone, and then converging again in the end to say, okay, so now we're cutting off this branch, we're cutting off this branch of the discussion, because we want to make sure that we have some sort of decision. And the decision could be that we're going to have another meeting about this, or the decision could be that we've solved this, whatever this was. And the interesting thing with retrospectives is it's so easy to diverge, it's so easy to open the floor, but once you're in the groan zone, people want that, they want to consolidate, they want to jump to the conclusions. You almost physically have to say to people, it's great that you have these ideas, but put them over here on a post-it note so we won't forget it. But right now we're trying to still talk about what are the causes behind these things, what can we learn from this. So that's a Wheel of Fortune, retrospective antipattern. In the soup is the next retrospective antipattern. You see the octopus here is unable to lift the weight on its own because the problem is too big for the team to solve. The octopus is like a team. You know that for a real octopus, 60% of its brain is in its 8 limbs, tentacles, and the rest of the brain is in its head. So to me, an octopus is like a team where everybody has their own intelligence, but together they have a complete intelligence and they're helping each other. But in this case, the whole team can't lift this weight. What has happened? Well, I want to introduce you to this if you don't know it already. It's the circles of influence, or the soup diagram that I learned from Diana Larsen and Esther Derby. You write 2 circles, one innermost circle with things that the team can do, the second circle with the thing that the team can influence, and then outside you have the soup, the things that the team can't do anything about. And sometimes you have a team that doesn't want to take responsibility for anything. So they always put up post-it notes with, he should do that, she should do that, management should do that, blah, 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 we should have more money for this. And if you notice that there's a trend there with your team, you can throw in this soup exercise after you've gathered data, and you can ask them, okay, so these things that you're talking about, where should we put them? Is it something that we could do something about? Is it something we can influence? Or is it something that's in the soup that we just have to accept and learn to live with and adapt to? I use this both after I've gathered data, but I can also use it after we have gathered a lot of proposals for action points, because sometimes when people have come up with a lot of proposals for action points, there are some of these things that they can't actually do. And then if that is the action point, you won't be able to do it because somebody else has to do it. So I want to give you an example for things that came from gathering data and things that came from deciding what to do. So maybe you're saying the communication with the testers is bad. That's when you gather data. That's just in the influence. You can't really change that yourself because the testers are not at the retrospective. I know that we all have cross-functional teams and there are no testers and developers in all of your organizations, but in some of the organizations I've seen, there still is a difference between testers and developers. It could also be that we've decided that we want to code review all major changes. That's definitely something that the team can do themselves. But it could also be that we want to change the location of the company, and that's possibly in the soup. That's something that they just have to learn to live with. How can we adapt to this situation? Most like COVID is something that we can't change, but we can adapt to the situation. And when you start doing this with a team, and you say to them, okay, so we put all these things up, now take a step back and look at what you put up. And then they can see everything is in the soup. And then they start saying, okay, we can see that we're not really taking responsibility for anything. It's much more powerful if the team can see that, if the team can actually reflect to that themselves, than you saying to them, you're not taking responsibility for anything. But if they can get that out of that, if they can infer that from that, that's much more powerful. And the other thing that happens is that once you start talking about it in this way, then sometimes you can actually take some things and move them closer to the do. You could say, okay, we can't change the location of the company, but maybe we can come up with reasons for a local hub or for have somebody working remote. We can't change the communication with the testers, but we could move physically closer to the testers, and that might influence our communication with the testers. The interesting thing about working with this is that when you have the discussion, you're talking about causes, you can actually pull these things closer into the middle, and that enables you to make action points that will actually be actionable for the team. There's a lot of actions in one sentence. But if they're not actionable, then the retrospective is a waste of time. There's so many ways a retrospective can be a waste of time. Prime directive ignorance. So Norm Kurth, the first one to write a book about retrospectives, it's called Project Retrospectives, and it came out before the Agile Retrospectives book. Norm Kurth wrote this prime directive that you can read while I take a sip of my water. So what Norm Kurth is writing here is that when you enter a retrospective, you should have the mindset that everybody did the best they could, given what they knew at the time, their skills, and how tired they were, and their experiences. And the problem is that often when somebody is doing something wrong, we blame them. But if we're doing something wrong, we know that it's somebody else's fault. Oh, it's because we were tired, or it's because we didn't have the data at the right time. So there's sort of something ingrained in us that wants to blame other people for what they're doing, blame them as people. And that's what Norm Kurth wants us to get away from. It's really difficult sometimes because we know that he didn't do his best and she didn't do her best. But if we try to go into that mindset as best as we can when we enter a retrospective, we're more open to a discussion, we're more open to learning, to appreciating what happened for that person. And also we might not be so afraid ourselves to go into a retrospective. Some people are afraid to go to a retrospective because they've messed up in some way or the other. And they're worried that they'll be scapegoated when we are at the retrospective. So this is about trying to come into that mindset to actually say, well, we do at least try to believe that everybody did the best they could. The problem is that sometimes as a facilitator, you know that some people don't like this saying. They don't like to hear that everybody did the best they do. They think it's a little bit hippie happy-ish. So as a facilitator, you don't show this because you're a bit embarrassed. You don't want people to think that this is ridiculous, or this is too positive. So what you should do as a facilitator, you should bring the prime directive. You can either bring it on a poster and set it up in the room where you're having the retrospective. It could also be in an email if it's online, in the invitation, to the calendar invitation, and you can just say it in your own words. You don't have to use Norm Kurth's prime directive words, but if you think they're too weird, you can just say, remember, we're trying to optimize a system that is your team. We're not trying to find out who to blame. It's a no blame, no game kind of meeting. And then some people will say, but what if we need to fire this person because they're really stupid and ridiculous and don't want to learn? And I say, fine, but that's not what we do in the retrospective. Maybe you should talk to management about that. What we do in a retrospective is that we assume everybody did the best they could. We try to reflect on what happened and we try to learn. So if you want to fire somebody, it's a different meeting. And then sometimes you have to remind those that need it. Even though you said it in the beginning, they might sort of forget during the day. I was once at a retrospective where somebody got blamed. I wasn't facilitating, I was part of the retrospective, and I saw the first post-it note on that person coming up. And the facilitator didn't do anything about it. So it ended up being a whole forest of post-it notes about this person that were really bad, and that person just left the retrospective because they felt they couldn't do anything now. People were just hacking on them and blaming them for everything. And what could the facilitator have done? Well, the facilitator could have reminded people that we're not trying to find somebody to blame. Maybe we could say, okay, so this happened. Why did it happen? And then not accept because he's stupid. So what situation was he in? What did he know at the time? What was the process? And I think that's something that's really wonderful if you can actually really start doing that. But you have to forget all your child learning where your mother said who started that fight and who left the milk out on the counter and things like that. So we're brought up with finding a scapegoat. So it's difficult to get away from it. You should also remember as a facilitator that the prime directive holds for you as well. you've also done the best you could. So don't blame yourself completely, at least, if it goes wrong in the retrospective. Others are helping you in that direction as well. It's not easy to facilitate good retrospectives, so be kind to yourself. So that's a prime directive, ignorance. The next one is the loudmouth. Have any of you ever had a loudmouth in the retrospective who couldn't shut up and who just talked and talked and talked? Somebody's pointing at other people. I like that. Didn't we just talk about that? Anyway, you're not listening. So a loudmouth, but there's sort of two different overall types of loudmouths. There are people who, once they start talking, somebody like me, just continues talking for an hour, and that's why I'm a speaker, because I like to do that. And there are also the people who are interrupting people all the time. So these are the two overall kinds of loudmouths. And what do you do if you have a loudmouth? Well, if you know already beforehand, then you can plan your retrospective agenda after that. But sometimes you're surprised, it's the first time you're with this team, and you notice that there's a loudmouth. And it's not socially acceptable to just say, shut up. I mean, I do sometimes do that, but I try to be more polite first, even though I'm Danish. So what can you do with a loudmouth? Well, as I said, you can change the activities. You can avoid the plenum discussions, because plenum discussions are where loudmouths thrive, right? They love plenum discussions because they can just talk and talk. So don't do that. Try to either have people write things on post-it notes or put people in smaller groups or maybe even pairs so that the loudmouth is only talking on that particular person. You're sort of containing the problem then. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is talking to the loudmouth one-on-one. So don't start blaming them at the retrospective, saying you're speaking too much, you're speaking all the time, because then they won't listen. Then if they're attacked, then they go into defense position. So talk to the loudmouth after the retrospective, or perhaps before the next retrospective. I've had loudmouths that didn't know they were loudmouths. And some of them actually, when they learned how to make a story shorter, could use that in their private lives as well. So the retrospective actually helped them become easier to be with, not just at the retrospectives. It's also sometimes funny that they don't know that they're loudmouths. And I remember once I was at a meeting with two loudmouths. We were just 3 people, and they were just talking all the time. And afterwards, they both came back to me and said, "He was just talking all the time." And I said, "Well, you know, you're both loudmouths." And no, I'm not a loudmouth. It's the other one who's talking. So they normally they don't really realize. So you need to be gentle with them and say, "It's wonderful what you're saying. It's really clever." Compliments always works to make people listen. But we need to hear from the other people as well. Otherwise, we could have a retrospective just with you and me, and that wouldn't really be the right thing. Sometimes I make a sign to use with the loudmouth, just shut up without saying it so that nobody else hears it. Or sometimes it helps to let them know they can speak later, because sometimes they've got something to say, they really need to say it, and they're worried that if they don't say it now, they've missed a chance. So if that is the situation, either you can infer that from their behavior, you talk to them and that's what they say. You can make use of the round robin a bit more, where you say, I'm going to ask the same question to everybody, or I'm going to ask everybody what they think about that, or I'm going to ask everybody what should we talk about now. Like, we've got 50 post-it notes up here, we only have an hour left. We need to just talk about the things that's most important, so I will listen to you. It can also be cultural, like if we have people from Italy speaking with people from Finland, that's definitely going to be a difference in how they think you should communicate. So that's the loudmouth. Do it yourself. As you can see, it's playing cards with itself, which is quite difficult, I think. Do it yourself is the antipattern where, okay, it's always the Scrum Master who's facilitating the retrospectives. So you are part of the team, for instance, because you're a Scrum Master, and you're the one who is facilitating all the retrospectives. That has some consequences. First, if you are facilitating for real, then you're looking at the agenda, you're following the time, you're figuring out whether the discussions are going in circles, and you're making sure that angry people are being hushed down and people who really need to speak will speak. So you're very busy as a facilitator. So if you're doing that well, you're not really part of the retrospective. You don't get a retrospective. On the other hand, if you become part of the retrospective and you vote and you discuss and you write post-it notes, then you can't look at the situation from above like the facilitator can, and then you forget the time or you forget to stop people from talking. And then it becomes a waste of time for you at least. It could also be that if it's the same facilitator facilitating all the time, they're using the same activities. And if you ask people the same questions in the same way, their brains are lazy and they'll answer in the same way, the same answers every time. So one of the reasons for changing your game, changing the way you gather data, or changing the facilitator, is to get people to come up with some different answers and not just the things that they said at the last 3 retrospectives. So how can you do this? Well, either within your little team, you can rotate the facilitation role. So you can have other people in the team also facilitate so that they come up with their ideas and you have a chance to get facilitated. So you could also do something else. You can do something in the whole organization. If you have a number of teams that need retrospectives and you have a number of people who likes to facilitate, then you can rotate that. And whenever people need a facilitation, you can sign up for that. So that's what we did in one of the companies I worked for, and that worked well. And then it turns out that some teams would like the same facilitator all the time. Some teams would like a new facilitator from time to time. So it depends on how they like it. If it's difficult for you to facilitate because you haven't learned anything about it yet, you're a novice, then you can make use of some of the online tools. And there's some online tools that just takes you through it and tells you as a facilitator what to do all the time, so you don't have to think about facilitating that much. There are also things that you can do, board games that you can download online, and then it takes you through a retrospective facilitation. You move around on the board and it tells you what to do and what the people in the team should do. So that's do it yourself. And then the last retrospective antipattern is disregard for preparation. I wrote this before COVID. It is about online retrospectives. And it's because it turned out to me that when I facilitate an online retrospective, it's different than facilitating an on-site retrospective. You need more preparation. So for instance, if you see that the team has come up with things that it looks like it's only in the soup and you want to do that soup activity, then you have to have prepared that beforehand, because it's more difficult to do that on the fly online, because you have to make these circles and you have to make a way to move the post-it notes from one part of the domain to the other. And there are also other things that are problematic with online conferences. It's often when you start an online conference, an online retrospective, you don't have a lot of time. Maybe you have an hour and 15 minutes or an hour. You don't want to lose a lot of time. So if people show up like 1 minute after the time, which is unfortunately often the case, and they have to look for the link and they have to figure out, do I need a password for this? Then it's a problem. So send the link to the document you're using for the retrospective at least 1 day before, and ask them, please make sure that you can enter this, so that you don't have to spend a few minutes on that when we start the retrospective. Also send an email reminder 15 minutes before, if you remember yourself or make your mail program plan to do it, because then you can say, okay, so there's a retrospective in 15 minutes, please go get some coffee and get a bio break, because otherwise when they see, okay, so now they start, oh, I can just get a cup of coffee. Or even worse, they come that time and then they see 2 people aren't there because they just had to go get some coffee, and then they say, okay, I'll get some coffee as well. And then while they are getting coffee, a 3rd person is entering and they say, okay, he's getting coffee, I can get coffee. And then you lose 7 minutes at the start of the retrospective, which is quite a lot percentily if you only have an hour. So try to prepare it so that you can start on the dot. And try to just start on the dot. Don't wait for people. Because if people notice that you wait for them, then they'll be late again the next time. That goes for all meetings. Insist on video for all. This is quite controversial. Some people are saying, I really don't like to be on video. I hate it. It makes me Zoom fatigued and stuff like that, which can be a very good cause for not being on video. But like with the Wheel of Fortune, I think you should at least have the conversation, ask people not at the retrospective, but afterwards, is there a reason why you're not on video? So there might be a good reason. But it could also be that the fact that they're not on video is just a symptom of some other problem. If they say, okay, I couldn't go on video because I'm taking this retrospective from my car, then the cause is that they're not really taking the retrospective seriously. Because taking a retrospective for a car is not really showing respect for your other team members, because you're supposed to look at what they're writing, you're supposed to write post-it notes yourself. So you can't really take the retrospective for a car, from the car. Also, if people saying, I can't go on video because I'm doing it from a cafe, the same problem. We want the retrospectives to be trusted. We want it to be so that what happens at the retrospective stays at the retrospective. People shouldn't talk about it afterwards. So try to insist on video for all. Make sure everyone is equal. Especially now when we're going hybrid. Some people are saying, oh, the 5 of us, we can be in the same room, and then those 3, they can be remote. It's going to be great for us because we're together. So when I'm presented with that, I say no. If some people are remote, everybody should be remote. And then they're saying, that's stupid, because we can just sit in this room together. We don't have to be on our own computer. And say, well, yeah, we want to be equal. Because you see, when some people are in the same room and other people are remote, the lowest common denominator for the way to communicate is not being met, because the people in the room together, they'll be communicating on a level where the people that are remote can't. But if everybody's remote, everybody's working with the same handicap, so the communication will be more clear, you'll be waiting a bit more for each other, hopefully, and you'll be looking at the same things. And you also know that when you are together, you are communicating not just with words, but also with body language and even smell, right? Where you can smell when people are getting agitated for one reason or the other. So I always try to do that, and sometimes people say, that's stupid, and then I say, well, then find another facilitator. I also once stupidly said yes to facilitating a retrospective where I was the only one online. So I was like from a screen above shouting down at them to do things, and it did not work out well at all. I'm not going to do that again. That was embarrassing. I'm sure if they recorded it, it would have been fun. So if it's only one person who's remote, it can sometimes work if you have an avatar. I don't know how many of you have watched the movie Avatar, but what I mean is that in the room where the rest of the team is together, you choose somebody who is an avatar for the one who is remote. So when the one who is remote wants to see something on the side, they take the phone and show that. If the one who's remote wants to write something on a post-it note, the avatar writes it on a post-it note for them and put it up. It works okay. It's not brilliant. And it only works if it's only one. And then prepare a strict agenda, as I said, and an alternative. So sometimes you have to think about, what are the people I have here? Do we have loudmouths? Is it people who don't want to take responsibility? Is it people who are talking about things they can't change? And then an alternative agenda, so that we can, okay, maybe you make a document where there's something hidden down here, and then you can remove the boxes that hides it, and then you say, okay, so we go here now instead of where I thought we should go. And then don't record it. It's just not a good idea to record a retrospective. I know that some people will say, oh, can we just record it because I can't make it today? No, don't do that. Because we want to trust that what happens at a retrospective stays at a retrospective, and if you record it, you don't know where it ends, right?